I want to talk about some of the mixed messages and inconsistencies that I've been noticing today. So, as context, I'm listening to Arthurian mythology at the moment on Audible, using the best sourced text that I can find. And it is filled with, bloodshed, deception, kind of coercion by force, domination, subjugation, extortion, blah, blah, blah. The typical framework of kingship, right? You have one king that's doing some domination, then another king comes and kills that king, and then pacifies, i.e. goes to battle with and comes out the victor throughout the country. And then in this case, now we're going out to other countries to pacify, i.e. kill large numbers of men in surrounding countries. And, who's to say that that is the real myth, right? That's the real thing. Or that, that's what Lazaris is referencing, right? But Lazaris does choose to reference that. And Lazaris has not chosen to associate themselves with Christianity. Well, that's your story, whatever it is, that's fine. If Jesus said do this, if you think that's the Christ-like thing to do, then do it. But even if you don't, do it anyway. Like, Christianity doesn't matter. But Lazaris has elevated the Merlin Arthur legacy, I think, to the highest status a myth could have within the Lazaris paradigm, saying that it is the only pathway to go all the way home, back to the source, back to God, Goddess, all that is. So that's a pretty high elevation. And in Lazaris's telling of the Merlin Arthur myths, I think Uther lies and commits rape to another woman's, to another husband's wife, right? So we're certainly not in the domain of principle and we're in the domain of lust and greed. And so that's quite a mixed message. So if we break down the mixed or opposing messages, we have the tension between domination and dominion, right? Dominion is the way to return home. Domination is the way into destruction and negative ego and all that. So dominion and domination, right? The opposite of one another, according to Lazaris. Then we have the Merlin Arthur legacy, the only way to go all the way back home, right? On the one hand. On the other hand, filled with what? Domination. Power over, force, deception, lies. Then we have another tension, like Lazaris will say that we're not the only ones. People can grow and learn and go back home through a variety of ways. But the Merlin Arthur legacy is the only way home, to go all the way home. And then we have the fact that it's filled with, a whole narrative tale of domination, deception, rape, etc. And so which is it? Because I don't know of anyone else in the world that is going to teach the Merlin Arthur legacy anything in the way Lazaris is doing. So we're not the only way. People can come in a variety of ways, but we're the only one teaching the Merlin Arthur legacy in this way, and that's the only path all the way home, right? So we've got some mixed messages there. But the mixed messages continue in the sense, when in one of the tapes, Lazaris is talking about the fact that, I think it's the joy tape, and what he's talking about is that ultimately there's no escape from complete and total happiness and joy, right? There's just no way around it. And that, we're going to fight it. We're going to avoid joy and happiness as much as we possibly can. But, at some point, we're just going to be swept over with the joy and happiness of all that is. And, we're going to fail, right? We're going to try to suffer and we're going to fail eventually. And he said the reason for that is the entire universe is resonating with peace and harmony and joy and, success, right? And love and all connected except you. You're the only ones in the entire fabric of reality, in the universe that's holding out. Except you, right? You're the holdouts in the entire, and you're going to lose. You're going to lose and be totally and completely happy eventually. And so that's the one kind of narrative, right? So like we're the only negativity in the entire fabric of reality, and we're bound to lose because we're so small relative to the totality of what is. Now, on the other hand, Lazaris has said that we're right. So then we flip to another conversation, right? And Lazaris says, you're not the banes of existence. You're not the dregs of reality. No, right? The whole universe is watching you. You are the people that master love, right? You are the, about love. And there's so many witnesses, right, around, the human experiment and, you're not the dregs of the universe, right? You're the light in the sense that many people are learning about love, or many beings and entities are learning about love. So you're the only part in the entire universe that, isn't completely and totally happy, right? You're the only negativity in the whole fabric. And you're not the negativity. You're the inspiration. You're the inspiration that the cosmos is looking to you for this unique and beautiful trait. Now, it sounds to me like those are two different narratives, right? You're the only source of struggle and negativity and all that, and you're bound to fail eventually, right? And all these other parts are here to learn, right? All these other consciousness are here to learn from you about love. So why are they here to learn about love if they're already happily blissed out and all that, and we're the only ones not doing that? Right? Why would you learn from that if you're already in that state, right? So mixed message there. And Lazaris has also said that there are civilizations mightier and vaster than your own, right? That out there in the universe, there are civilizations mightier and vaster than yours. And does mightier and vaster imply more successful, more loving, less, right? Where does that fit in, right? It's just a hanging statement. Now, the challenge, right? I would say the tendency right? Because Lazaris is more competent than 90% of the people that Lazaris is talking to and with. Lazaris is more competent at articulation. Right? Just look, if you ask anyone objectively to listen to the entire body of the Lazaris material since inception, right? And then challenge, let's say, 1 million people. Let's say you challenge 1 million people to come up with a body of words that is that long, however many millions of words, that has, a compelling narrative. We look at series, the best series that I know, the Chinese are very good at this. They can come up with 200 episodes. It's a great mythological series called Ashes of Love. It's fantastic. The mythological structure, the nuance, etc. And 200 episodes, and you're still interested in the different sub-characters and their lives and all that. So 200 episodes, right? But that's pushing it. There's not many narratives that don't deteriorate after 10 or 20 or 30. Like, I think the recent Star Wars movies are worse than the 80s and 90s Star Wars movies. So they've already, the more they keep pushing that dynamic, the more they lose, right? That original sense of, the first Star Wars movie, right? So, but, Lazaris has, I think, done a tremendous job, right? So how many people out of 1 million could come up with that body of work and have anyone still interested in, a next episode? So Lazaris has got to be in the top 1%, right? The top 1% for articulating talent. I would also say that Lazaris is probably in the top 1% for integration. Now, there are these huge, somewhat schizophrenic and, unintegrated bits, right? That Lazaris saying clear crystals are the way to go, and then just after selling a bunch of clear crystals, pivoting to the richness, right? And you can't have a total ancient one crystal that's totally clear. No, you need this and that, right? So that's an inconsistency, right? Or talking about the inspiration of Penny and and all of that, and then talking about what a good death looks like, and then just kind of glossing over the fact that whether it's suicide or dying of complications of vodka and painkillers and misery and all that is not what we talked about in terms of you're ready to die and you make your preparations and you just leave your body. And so when there's such a big schism between the people closest to Lazaris and the material, that's a huge integration block, right? When more employees as a percentage are upset with Jach and Penny than are upset with Zappos leader or a variety of good, great companies, statistically, you see there's like proximity to the material, disconnect with the material, right? So there's definite schisms, but nonetheless, to be able to write, from the 70s or produce material from the set, you've got incredible amount of integrity. Like I can probably list 10 major schisms maybe 20 out of thousands, right, of pretty good woven connections. And so that's impressive, right? Again, top 1%. So top 1% of integrity. And then I would say generally a supportive, kind message. Again, top 1%. I can't pull anything like that off, right? So, we're way into the top 1%, of that. Now, I might be able to pull it off if, people paid me to be in a relationship and I defined the subject and who got to talk and when, and set the venue and pick, venues I liked and topics I liked, and, made lots of money and wasn't interrupted. I hate being interrupted, but, Lazaris is not interrupted. And so I might be able to pull it off, right? I don't know. But it's just, just creating all that is a phenomenal thing. So we're in the top 1% of, at the very least, know your limits. So what I'm getting at is Lazaris is more competent than you and I, in some very key areas. And what I've noticed is that because I'm also high in articulating talent, and what that means is I can write books about things that I understand mentally and I can see clearly, but I can't do them, right? I can recognize a very emotional and empathic woman, for example. But I cannot go into the feelings just because I can recognize and spot that more than most people, and I can engage with that. I have all kinds of physiological defenses against going into, to deeply vulnerable feeling. And so the fact that I can talk about it, write about it, articulate it, spot it, and engage with it doesn't mean that I can do it. Now, what I find is an interesting blind spot in our culture is that the average person imagines that if I can say things more clearly than they do, or than they can say things, and that has deteriorated. After developing PTSD, I've lost 40% of my coherence. Maybe it's only 30% now because I've made a lot of videos and practiced. But I'm 30% less coherent today than I was, 6 or 7 years ago. And that just tapered off dramatically, after traumatic events. And along with memory, I have 40 to 60% less memory today than I had, before the traumatic events. But I'm still in the top 10% of articulators in terms of the ability to get what I am aware of in my body, etc., into words. And people assume that because I can do that I know how to do what I'm saying more than they do. And that's often backwards, meaning there are many areas where I can say things better than 90% of people, but can do them less than half of the people, right? So I can say things better, but I can do them less than average. And so that's, but that's not there as a question, right? People assume that articulating talent correlates with implementation talent. And in my own awareness, it doesn't, right? So people are going to be making that same correlation, that same false projection on Lazaris, because Lazaris has superior articulating talent to me, and may or may not have, implementation talent. but that will be projected. Now, as always, right, when you create a deity, now a deity is just some pattern of energy ahead of you, right? We all have values. We all have ideals. Everyone. Someone on the street wants to have who's selling heroin for $2 wants to sell it for $5. A gang leader with a Porsche wants to be a gang leader with a Bentley or whatever it is, right? Everyone has ideals. The dictator that's only a dictator of a small country, aspires to learn from Hitler, right? Bigger dictator. Trump was, couldn't say enough about Putin and our Chinese. It's like these guys know how to run a country. They never have to give up power. Like, Putin knows some things, right? Because Trump could only hang on to power for 4 years, right? But these guys had pulled something off that Trump could only dream about, right? To be in power forever, right? And so this is, so we always look up to the structures, to the patterns, the people, the figures, the myths that are ahead of our values. I find it all the time, right? Suddenly I was an amazing person when a woman learned that I was a successful architect and business owner and stuff, because that's what she wanted to do, right? So I was a nothing as a nonprofit, purveyor of community activities, right? Something I'm admiring and wanting to be more like. But as soon as she knew that I was, decades ahead of her in her ambitions in art and, architecture and all that, then suddenly I was a great person to ingratiate to, right? So we always look up to, bow to, adjust around our deities. Those are the people that are ahead of us. And so that's a tendency. And when you're dealing with that dynamic, and you say opposing things, domination is, the source of all the bad things, dominion is the source of the good things. You don't have to work with us. The Merlin Arthur legacy is the only way home, but you don't have to work with us, but it's the only way home. And the Merlin Arthur legacy is filled with domination, but domination is the bad thing. This is called brainwashing, right? You do a series of opposing things that don't fit together, and you've got a vertical relationship, of deification of some sort. And because of that, you're adjusting, right? Nobody's saying, hey, Lazaris, this is our workshop. Could you cut it out there? Just lay off a bit there. We'd like to ask some questions or talk about some of the things that so you don't do that to your deity, right? So when there's something that's too far ahead, or the assumption is always the same. Now, why does a 5-year-old always blame themselves when punched in the face? Why? Alice Miller says that however cruel a parent is, that all cruelty from a parent towards a small child will be reinterpreted as love, right? And so love gets mixed up, because the more cruel you are to an infant and a child, the more twisted their definition of love becomes, because the parent is 10 times bigger, 10 times more powerful, 10 times more experienced. So the child projects the deity onto the giant, right? And then the schizophrenia and the brainwashing, always tell the truth. How dare you embarrass me in front? I told the truth. How dare you? And then next day, What's the truth? You know you have to tell the truth. How dare you? Right? So this schizophrenia, this brainwashing just traumatizes a child into this state where just tell me what the truth is today. It changes every hour, right? Don't tell dad. You always obey your parents. Don't tell dad. Don't do that. Just like, well, what is it, right? Let's give to the poor. Don't talk to the poor people. But Christianity is the way. Give to the poor. Don't talk to the poor. What are you thinking? Well, I thought the whole. You said read the Bible, but the Bible. Don't. Just go to your room, right? So it's not that bad, right? With Lazaris, but you also don't grow out of Lazaris as reliably as you grow out of your parents. And so, this schizophrenia, I think it moves into a brainwashing of, let's just keep listening to Lazaris, and one point or another, it will all be explained. But it could be explained 10, 20 years ago just by more question, more dialogue, more engagement, right? But if you're thrown out of the room, right, and concept synergy keeps a black list with security guards to make sure that some people cannot get in the room, right? The highest resonance to ever touch the planet, banned, right? The greatest human fear, the fear of loneliness, right? Well, what's it like to lose your spiritual friend, the one that's going to be all there forever and ever and never going to forsake you? But no, you said something, you can't come into the workshop. Right? That's one of the big disconnects right there, right? Where your friend, but you have to pay us, you can't talk, you can't do this, you can't come to the workshop. We're not going to talk about, we're not going to advocate, we're not going to say, hey, we're Lazaris here, concept synergy isn't doing what we want, we don't need a security guard, anyone that needs to come in can come in. No. We'll just leave them out. We'll never forsake you. We'll just leave you outside, having convinced you that we're the highest resonance, that you're banned. Because the paranoia, the egotistical lies, the incompetence of our channel, right? Which we couldn't teach, right? So you have all this stuff going on, and you've got nowhere to digest it, right? Because when you're in an abusive family, when I started telling my siblings about the dysfunctions in my parents, they each had a defense because they weren't ready to grasp that the parent wasn't God, right? Because they depended on those godlike figures for housing and certain amount of validation and stuff. They depended on that. They needed that. And so they weren't ready to see the shadow of, right? And so they cast me out, right? My siblings got upset, right? Because, you're saying bad things about mom and dad, right? And then mom and dad got upset, right? That some of their shadow was coming to light, right? So they said, Dane doesn't love you, right? Dane doesn't care, but don't listen to Dane, right? He doesn't love you. He doesn't, right? So then I'm cast out of the family system because, right, the shadow creator, whether it's sexual infidelity or lies or physical violence or hypocrisy, and the parents don't want to think about that or feel about that or apologize or acknowledge, right? And the children don't want to face it. Oh my gosh, maybe I'm being raised by a psychopath that could be, who knows what will happen next, right? I don't want to feel all that. I just want to say, no. Whatever it is, mom knows best, dad knows best, right? And they want that too, right? So this is, and so in that sense, it's, right? Will we be cast out? will we be cast out for, right? That's the whole Christian myth, right? Apparently Lucifer cast out because he wouldn't go along with, God the control freak. And then concept synergy has amplified that again because, okay, you can't go to workshops, but if you say anything at all bad about Lazaris, you can't access the material, right? Your friend who's promised to be with you eternally, right? Cut off, right? If you don't agree to subjugate yourself, your freedoms, to our domination. Dominion is the good thing, domination is the bad thing. You can't get access to the good thing unless you agree not to speak, to be silent, right? You have to write to concept synergy for permission to say anything about Lazaris. Right? Suddenly you don't have free speech. Right? Just give up all your power, right? Just don't throw me out of the room, right? And that's how every dictator reigns, right? That person was speaking, now they've disappeared. Anyone else want to speak? Anyone else? Oh. What a lovely country we have, right? Freedom of speech for all. Right? But if they disappeared as well, right? We're talking about that? No, we're in spiritual bliss, right? It was meant to be, right? They create their own reality, right? Don't peel back the veil, right? So these are some of the hypocrisies, extremes, dysfunctional, incoherent polarities that are within the space that are politically incorrect. So they're in the shadow. They're in the shadow of concept synergy, the shadow of Lazaris. Lazaris isn't talking about them, so they're in the shadow, right? They either have to come to consciousness or they play out in the world. Well, they're playing out in the world. And so, right, but you can't talk about that either, right? And so it is an interesting paradox, but the vulnerability is that if anyone projects too much deity onto Lazaris, then the dynamic becomes one of brainwashing rather than critical thinking and engaging. Now, that's one of the reasons I make these videos, meaning I don't want to enter the brainwashed state. I know what living in insanity feels like, right? Because that's what many abusers do. After the abuse, their final abuse is they ask you to go insane. And they do that by first pretending the abuse never happened. Second, pretending the abuse is not going on. And thirdly, pretending that the reason we can't even talk about the abuse that never happened and isn't going on is because we love you and we're better than you or what, which is patently insane. You've now asked the child, asked the student, asked the spiritual seeker or follower to totally invert sanity, to lose touch with their self, right? Their self, aware of their own eyes, aware of their own thoughts. No. You can't question, right? You question this, you question everything. If you question everything, you're an evil person. You'll burn in hell for eternity, and we'll have nothing to do with you, and we'll never speak to you again. I just wanted to know why this and you're out, right? So, Jach obviously knows a lot about this with homosexuality because it's one of the ostracization points, right? So it's not a ostracization point in the Lazaris community. In the Lazaris community, it's free speech, right? It's critical thinking. It's doubting Lazaris, right? So every cult has its has its area where you're cast out if you cross that line, right? But that's not home, right? You don't get home to God got us all that is, where there's space for all that is in a loving relationship, where this is cast out, controlled, and denied. Right? And so the good kings had a joker by their side, and their job was to make fun of the king and say the things that everyone else was afraid to say. And that's, right? But those would be Lazaris's critics, which are banned, right? They're pushed into the shadow domain. And then and Terry Clancy and Barbara Brennan, when I was talking with them, said that they were all frightened. There was a website at some point, I think it maybe still exists, but they were all frightened of the website where people said negative things about Lazaris and concept synergy. There's no reason to be frightened of it if you're dealing with it, right? When you bury something, you have to be afraid that it will come up. And it usually does. If you bury it, first of all, anyone who buries something does so out of fear. You never bury something, the truth, except out of fear, right? It's the only reason to do it. Don't tell your mother, right? Don't tell her. Why? Because I'm afraid she'd leave me if she saw my adultery, right? Don't tell anyone that you're gay, right? Why? Well, I'm afraid that they'll think badly of me, like maybe I'm a bad father, whatever, don't tell anyone. All suppression is done out of fear. Don't say you're having doubts about Lazaris. Don't say you're having doubts about Jesus, right? Mother Teresa, right, if you read her biography, is having doubts. Is this really it? Why haven't I not felt the revelation and all that? So all suppression is done out of fear. And whatever is suppressed, you have to spend energy suppressing it. So that weakens you, right? And what generally happens if you look at things is there's a small crime, like look at Clinton's impeachment or whatever. There's a small crime, right? You taught an intern how to perform fellatio, and that's not cool. This is a small crime. But then you lie about it and do this, and people get a whiff of that, right? And then you do this and this and this and this, and then it becomes the big deal, right? Because the bigger crime is all the lies and deception that has to be done to keep the truth down. And so you keep something down out of fear, and the more you have to keep it down, the more energy you have to spend keeping it down, hiding it, buying off this person, that person, doing this, doing that, making up other lies that are consistent with the new lie. It becomes, you get weaker. But the evidence of inconsistency gets stronger, because every single thing you do to cover something up builds the energy of the system that is the truth, right? So, so it just keeps coming out more and more and more, and then you have to spend more and more of your energy, and it can totally destroy you. Spend your entire energy trying to suppress the network of lies, right? And then it comes out, right? If Jach was interested in addressing any of these things publicly or whatever, this whole channel wouldn't exist, right? It comes out, right, because there are big things in this space, and the less nobody wants to address them and talk with them, the more crazy it gets. And the more crazy it gets, the more it needs to be talked about, right? And so that's just the way it works. This tension, right? And it could get really big, right? And this is, moderately intelligent, I think, of concept synergy. Imagine if concept synergy was what would have sued me as I started doing these things, because I let them know that if we can't talk about these things face to face, if we can't talk about them on the forum, if people are going crazy due to this schizophrenic stuff and it can't be talked about, then it has to be talked about, in public for someone. I don't want other people to be alone in this insanity. So, but imagine if they'd sued me, as like the Church of Scientology is unraveling because of all some of their stuff is nuts, but the real problem that they're unraveling is their extreme overreaction and criminal activity to destroy people talking about the craziness. So then you get to have press, right? Then you get to have a news story, right? So spiritual place sues, spiritual cult sues person for using the name Lazaris, right? So then you have a huge opening up of the shadow, right? You get more and more people, right? Because that is the story of our age. Every myth, every story that's emotionally relevant for people is the conversation going on inside of them, the inner dialogue between the repressive voice, the dominance, the free voice, the opening. Those conversations happen in each one of us. I don't want to look bad, so I'm not going to say that I feel depressed. I say I feel positive. I feel grateful, right? I feel so depressed. Am I the only one feeling depressed in this positive seminar? And so there's all these inner dialogues, right? And so the myths, whether in media or in mythology, that speak to us, speak to the tensions and how those tensions and dialogues get resolved, right? And what are they, right? I want to be spiritual. I want to look good. So because I want to look good, I've got to hide all these things that don't look so good. And because I want to hide them, I've got to silence these people. And it gets darker and darker because I want to look good. It gets darker and darker because I want to look good, right? And these are the tensions of our time.